There will also be a lot of planning about what happens in a world in which the INF Treaty is no longer in effect. There's a number of negative consequences for the international security architecture if the INF Treaty ceases to be in force. There may well be a number of efforts to maintain, even without the force of a legal treaty, the status quo to keep the regime of the INF Treaty more or less in effect. But certain things become possible. Russia will now have the option to deploy intermediate range nuclear missiles absent the treaty, which can not only target all of Europe, but effectively all of Asia and the Middle East. So this runs, one, the threat of opening up our allies to new threats, two, the possibility of destabilizing situations where missiles, potentially nuclear-armed missiles with short warning time, hard to detect, a destabilizing strategic situation.
All members of the NATO-Russia Council agree that the treaty has been crucial to Euro-Atlantic security. But the treaty is now in jeopardy. All allies agree that Russia's SSC-8 system violates the INF Treaty. But Russia still has an opportunity to come back into compliance, and we call on Russia to use that opportunity.
The other thing that's different from the time the INF Treaty went into effect and today is that the Cold War was essentially a high-stakes but very static strategic confrontation across the Iron Curtain. Okay. Today's situation is much more fluid and dynamic. And you see, for instance, Russia using military force in Ukraine, using military force in Syria. As one example, Russia, a few years ago, launched intermediate-range cruise missiles from the Caspian Sea into targets in Syria. Those were sea-based missiles, therefore not prohibited by the INF Treaty. But if the INF regime were not in effect, Russia would have the option of using land-based missiles in ongoing conflicts. If there weren't any limits on missiles with a range up to 5,500 kilometers, one, you would have a threshold issue of determining whether a missile was unlimited in the INF range or limited under the START regime. Second effect on the strategic arms limitation regime would be that the numbers of warheads limited by the START regime would have less constraint if Russia could take intermediate range missiles and use them to cover targets that currently it has to devote warheads which are covered under the numerical limits of the START regime.